so what I wanted to talk about, and there's 5 of us up here. Chad Herman, who I initially asked, can't be here since kind of scheduling issues. So now there's more time for the 5 of us as opposed to the 6 of us. And I wanted to discuss just in general, and I don't have any answers for this, I just have a lot of philosophical questions. What are the ethical limits of political blogging? And political blogging is different from, say, sports blogging or knitting blogging or what the attorney over there said, mashing bananas for your baby's food blogging, which are all valid blogging.
I was wondering when that part was coming.
Oh yeah, it's all valid, But discussing and commenting on political issues of the day, whether local or regional or federal. And I just wanted to start with just an issue that I stumbled into recently. I made a mistake. I was on vacation, and there was an article in the New Yorker magazine about the C Street residence. C Street residence, for those of you who don't know, is a residence in Washington, D.C., owned by an organization. An organization might be able too strong of a term, called the Family. It's a Christian organization, and there were some members of Congress who lived there, rented space. And it's also ended up in the news as, for instance, Senator Ensign was a resident at C Street, and the New Yorker article was about a couple of interventions that the other members of Congress who were living there had with Senator Ensign when it turned out that Senator Ensign had an affair. And I misread the article, and I put online that Congressman Doyle, who is the local congressman, who's also a member, resident of the residence, was, thank you, that he was at both interventions. And so I figured that I was quoting the New Yorker, I posted it, I sent an email to his office looking for a comment, and I got a comment back from the congressman saying that he had issues with the New Yorker article and an issue with what I posted because he wasn't at the first intervention. And I went back to the New Yorker article and realized, to my disgust, that I had misread it. And so I posted a comment, I scratched out what I had written, I said it was incorrect, that I misread it, and I apologized to everyone around. But it led to a question of, just in general, the boundaries of what goes online and what doesn't go online. This is what I wanted to ask each member of the panel here. Because I know I get tips, send me, you should be looking at this. This is what's going on. What is the general, for each of you, this is the question, what is your criteria defining what doesn't go on from what does go on? I can tell you, for me, is if it's something I can verify, but if it's something I can find a factual-based New York Times, Washington Post, some kind of credible news organization, USA Today, if it's in a government organization, government printing, BBC, then I can go with it and then comment on it. If it's something I can't find online at all, then I don't touch it at all because who knows whether it's true. So I'll start with Maria. If I can start.
Sure.
What is your criteria for what do you talk about and what don't you talk about?
Mine's a lot more loosey-goosey, I have to admit. If it's a website, a blog that I trust, then I will, quote from that. There have been things that I've been very close to posting that I had a little something in my mind said, I don't know if it was like the BP oil well is really a giant gaping hole 20 miles away, and I thought, doesn't sound quite right. It'd be great to post. It's an interesting story, but something said, and I didn't know the website, so I didn't publish it. And then later on, there was a lot of criticism of it. So I just kind of play it with my gut. I mean, I would love to be able to have something that could really find reliable and back it up. And I prefer to go that route, but sometimes I am, publishing something I saw on some other blog. And I do check out where they got it from, but I can't always, I'm not a paid reporter. I don't have, I can't sit there and look things up, spend all day or a month or a week, looking things up. So I just try and be careful, but obviously I publish a lot of satire and have gotten in trouble for it, so.
What kind of, well, tell me.
That's a whole other matter.
What kind of trouble, what kind of satire?
For those who don't know it, 5 years ago maybe, I did a parody of a Absolute Vodka ad called Absolute Corruption with all the Bush administration people in the bottle, trying to get out. And I received a cease and desist email from D&S Spirits, who are the makers of Absolute Vodka, and also a wholly owned company of the Kingdom of Sweden. So I felt like I was having something after me. Yes. An email, yeah. So I kind of called around and, ACLU, and they said, well, there's no real case yet, but we might be interested if there was one. And I was like, oh, great, we have no backing here. But I created a very long email and reply, just kind of researching, well, obviously there is some, fair use and the idea of a satire and quoting cases and things, and then also they said they were never political in their email, and I found some things where they were political. I mean, it was pretty loosely political, like red tape and government, or something with Salman Rushdie, which was kind of political. He's holding something burning. So I just kind of tried to answer them point by point, and then 3-4 months later, got an email back from them saying, well, we don't want to. I couldn't believe it. They just kind of backed down. They said we don't want to, abridge your free speech or something like that. They actually said something with free speech in it. Could you just put a disclaimer? And of course, don't sell the image. Don't put it on T-shirts. Don't put it on mugs, which people had asked me to do. So I said, yeah, I'm agreeable to that. Of course, it said at the top of it, and you probably know the phrase, that this is not, this is subject to change at any time. They could come at me at any time, but it's 5 years later. So I think it helped that there were two things, that there were some articles, one in the Post-Gazette on it, one in the city paper on it. I think it helped that Bush was starting to really lose his popularity, and I think it helped that I had also cross-posted it on Daily Kos, which is a huge website. And I pointed out to them, hey, you're going after them, So I think all that helped. But they basically kind of backed down enough to say, and I put the disclaimer exactly as they want to say, oh, that's fine, I don't need to change it. And it remains up to this day. So.
Maria, I have a question for you. Probably, I think it's fair to say on this panel, I am the only person who has been paid for my writing. Would that be correct? I
got a sponsorship once, but not
on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Okay. You brought up an interesting point that I'd like to talk about, and that is the fact that you said, since I'm not getting paid for this, so you don't have time to do this and that. Do you feel that, because there is no monetary incentive, that you have there is less of a responsibility?
No, and I wouldn't want to state it that flatly. I mean, there's obviously there's less time and there's less effort. I can't really do what I would love to do, but I don't think it probably legally makes me any less responsible. I mean, we did have Google Ads up for a while, but they didn't pay us.
And what is your feeling about, just generally speaking of your experience with political blogs specifically? What have you seen? So, in discussing with other political bloggers, do they have that same ethic that you just spoke to?
I mean, there have been a lot of blogs over the years, and many of them coming on very quickly. I mean, some of them, every once in a while you'll get this blog that lasts for a couple of months, and it'll be going after one person. And some people have been sued over something like that. But in general, if you're just putting out a general political blog, I don't think people have had too much problems. I think maybe in their personal lives, maybe if their employer found out, there could have been problems or something. But to my knowledge, there hasn't been, any big cases that I can think of, other than a few little here and there where someone would create a blog specifically to say to go after one public official or something. I mean, obviously, the Corbett case, the Twitter case, where Attorney General Tom Corbett went after Casablanca, PA, which is a blog, and they have a Twitter account, and he went after them. His office went after them to sue to find out who they were, on the basis supposedly that it was a defendant that was going to be had been found guilty, and that would somehow go into what kind of sentence he should have, because he wasn't repentant, because he was still maybe blogging on company time. I'm not even sure really because it didn't seem to have a real basis, and they dropped it because they got faced so much criticism for trying to unmask some people who Twittered against. Obviously, it seemed like such a dick move. I mean, it was a real vendetta. criticizing me, and I'm going.
That's
I mean, it was
5 other dirty words.
yes.
And you brought up another topic that I wanted to talk about, and feel free to cut me off or interrupt at any time. I'm used to it. And that is anonymity. From my understanding, to me, the whole idea of being an anonymous blogger is really just an illusion. And for example, there's a blog that some of you may have heard of, and that's the blog called Infanonymous. And I have it on good authority that who that person is, and my source.
Can we speak after?
But yet, it is not. My ethics will not allow me to reveal who that person is. But it's pretty well known by several people whose judgment I trust greatly who that person is. So, as far as what you were talking about, the lawsuits and everything, I think a lot of people know that bloggers often don't have deep pockets. They're not worth suing, but yes, they're usually, well, some of them maybe. But, so there's that, but there's the emotional part of it, But from my experience, those of us on the panel today really, and I wouldn't be sitting here with you if I didn't believe that you really do, exercise excellent judgment and ethics.
Well,
when it comes to blogging.
Maria and I used to blog under pseudonyms at the Hansberg is a Liar, yeah. Hansberg is a Liar blog. Yeah, so.
Can you prove that?
That we blogged under pseudonyms, or that he was a liar?
He's a liar.
Well, I mean, if you look at the blog, you can find many places where what he was saying was the truth, actually wasn't the truth. And Fred was a friend of mine. I mean, when he passed away, it was very sad. I disagreed with his politics, but I disagreed with, but I found him to be a generally nice guy, one-on-one. I don't know if anyone else has that impression of him. But I was under a pseudonym because at the time I was, as they say, between employment opportunities. And I didn't want to make it necessarily easy for someone to, if I had a resume come across his desk, to someone to just Google the name and then find, here's this guy who's fact-checking Fred Hansberger every day. Although the odd coincidence is that if you do Google the name David D'Angelo, and those of you who are online right now, you'll find a website called Double Your Dating. And I'm not kidding about this. Double Your Dating. And that is a pseudonym of a guy named Eben Pagan, who's a member of something called the Seduction Community. And I am not making this up. It's how to score with chicks, man. And it's very strange. It obviously makes a lot of money because there's a lot of books out.
Not if he does this.
Hey, baby!
We have a believer right here.
And so, I'm sorry?
I'm glad you're married.
Yes, so am I. And so I've had to explain to a number, I discovered it about 10 years ago, and I had to explain to a number of people that I had just met that I am not that David D'Angelo. Oh, this doesn't have anything to do with what you just said, but...
very interesting, though.
Yes, very interesting coincidence. Sue, I wanted to ask you, what are your ethical boundaries?
Well, it's interesting. I think I, too, go with intuition a lot in terms of what I should and should not write. Now, writing primarily about lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues, there's not as many primary sources. I mean, we just don't get the same kind of media coverage. And of course, it's a little bit more focused. So sometimes finding those sources is tough, and I am relying on the mainstream gay blogs. And so I just have to pull them in as my source because it's very difficult. Pam Spalding at Pam's House Glen has a lot of primary sources that she pulls, and then she posts them. She is screenshotting them and scanning them and all of that. So it's a little bit more removed, but I have a lot of confidence in her credibility. So, I'm sorry.
Well, for everyone here, how do you establish confidence in the blogs that you're posting on? Because I have to admit, I don't have any. I mean, just because Maria and I posted the same blog, I don't have any sort of editorial sway over what she posts, and she doesn't have any editorial sway over what I post. I tend not to quote other blogs unless they are talking points memo or something that's more or less established, because it's difficult for me to have confidence, even though I'm a blogger, to have confidence in what a blogger says as whether it is factual, whether it's a statement of fact as opposed to something that someone has spun. So perhaps I'm more cowardly than the two of you by hiding back and saying, well, the facts that I'm using are directly commented, directly posted from the Times or CNN. So if you have a problem with the facts, you don't have a problem with me, you have a problem with CNN. So how do you establish, and Bram, you haven't talked yet, but how do you just establish that you have confidence in, say, I'm trying to think of a blog that I would read but not necessarily quote from.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Wikipedia, for instance.
Maybe you don't want to be asking me, but you obviously did. You invited me. Sometimes I think like, oh, you asked me to speak about ethics in blogging. It's like, oh, that's great. And after this, I'm going to teach a spinning class. And after that, I'm going to do open heart surgery and teach everyone how to do that. But in as much as that dilemma goes, I don't really think too much about pulling material from other blogs, sources, online stuff, if that's what I want to use. Mostly because A, I'll present, who it came from, make clear who it came from. B, if it's someone I haven't quoted before, I'll present, okay, this is my knee-jerk reaction to the site, how credible it looks, do a little bit of poking. And C, maybe it's just me, I think everyone is being spun. I think everyone is, to an extent, possibly not credible. That goes up from the mainstream media all the way down to some quirky anonymous blog in the corner of the internet. And if they're saying something that's interesting to me, or if they present a fact and are able to cite their own sources, that just continues the discussion. So no, I'm actually a little surprised to hear that you won't pull things from blogs because of that skepticism. Because I think increasingly the audience is sophisticated enough to make those judgments on their own. The only judgment I want to make is this interesting? Is this something that I want to talk about? Obviously, if it smells, I'm going to want to ignore it 9 times out of 10.
Would you quote anything from WikiLeaks?
Yes, because, I wouldn't quote just my own stuff. I wouldn't quote Wikipedia. I used to. And then just bubbled up in the news, there were, I think Stephen Colbert was able to change something in the Wikipedia. And the thing you have to recognize about the Wikipedia is that, I'm sorry? When whatever you're seeing on the Wikipedia is just what the last editor, who could be anyone on the planet, allowed you to see. The beauty of it is the bibliography, the references down at the bottom, because if they are quoting the Times, the CNN, or something, those are reliable because it's more or less real news. But WikiLeaks, I would, because those are the actual documents that have been, quote unquote, leaked to the offshore servers in Iceland or wherever they are. So yeah, of course, WikiLeaks. I don't think I've ever linked to anything there yet. But I wouldn't quote WikiLeaks says about Senator McGovern, blah, 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 blah. Because 3 days later, someone goes to the URL and finds it's completely different because it's constantly being updated. And I always use the HTML codes as kind of, this is for someone to check my work. And in the end, that's kind of the bottom line of my own sense of verification. I'm going to put your work on the screen so someone can check and see if you are speaking truthfully, if you are getting the facts right. And then if the problem is there, then the problem is somehow removed from you. And you just can't do that with Wikipedia. And I have some trouble doing that with some blogs that are, again, the stereotype of some guy sitting in his mother's basement with Cheetos, Cheeto crumbs on his mouth. Because who's this guy? Who is Bob Smith? Who is Buffalo Bill? Whatever. They may be making stuff, they may be pulling stuff out of their butt just like anyone else. And how do you know that what they're saying is true? If they're quoting someone, then you go to what they're quoting and see if that's true.
Bram, do you make a distinction between reporting on the story that Buffalo Bill in this basement is reporting on, and reporting on the fact that there's a Buffalo Bill, reporting here's a blog and the story, and I'm going to run with their story, where the story is the fact that there's this blog that kind of
usually it's my habit to start the story quoting Post-Gazette, Tribune Review, KDKA, WTAE, and then make a digression. Here's what Sue from Pittsburgh Lesbian Correspondents has to say. And it'll be something typically, insightful and inciting both. But then, like I said, I think clearly at that point, there's a point where it's appropriate to trust your audience that if they're reading your blog, chances are they read blogs and they have that internal memorandum. Now, it may be necessary in some situations to say, I took a look at this new blog and I went through it. It seems like this person really has some axes to grind, and I wouldn't be, since it's anonymous, I wouldn't be totally surprised if this is someone who works in the office of that person's enemy, and so on and so on. Now, if you don't mind, if I can address a couple things that Francis said about anonymity. That's interesting. I love anonymous blogs. Do not get me wrong. I think especially in this kind of political atmosphere where there is so much backlash that can happen to a person if they speak truth to power, anonymous blogs are absolutely necessary. I love them and I read them and I quote them, etc. However, I do think there is a higher threshold for ethical ethics when it comes to them. Maybe it's conceit. I sort of just feel like putting my own name in my picture on my blog sort of puts me on the spot enough that I feel like I have that license, like you were talking about, to go ahead and give an opinion that is, sharp or, jump to a conclusion that I feel is reasonable or expressive. When it comes to an anonymous, I get a little upset whenever an anonymous blog will say something that is really inciting to anger, or something that I've heard from anonymous sources, because then if the anonymous person is telling me they've heard something from anonymous sources, that's 2 steps away from reality, which gets a little weird. So I do hold them to a higher standard, and I do tend to jump on them a little bit faster, like I've sort of appointed myself on occasion the police of the ethics police, which is not something I deserve to do, but I think it's something that we should all be doing. I think it's good practice. And finally, similarly, you said something about the ethics of outing anonymous bloggers. Now, to me, personally, now there are anonymous bloggers that I would never out because I enjoy them and I respect them, and I wouldn't want to, if they're on my side, and I wouldn't want to do that to them. But at the same time, if you're talking about ethics, if you can prove that an anonymous blogger is somebody, and you have it, and it's you have the truth value there, I don't see the ethical problem in that at all. My first journalistic-y act on my blog was to out Matt Hogue.
I was just going to ask that, yeah.
And mainly that was because I disagreed with him.
Had you agreed?
No, I was right, so I wasn't
outed him?
What's that?
Had you agreed with him, would you have outed him?
If I probably not, but I thought it was important that he was on the Democratic Committee, which he has a totally different politics now. We're like this nowadays. But back then he was on the other side of the ideological spectrum than me, and he was on the Democratic Committee, and he worked on some campaigns. So I figured, okay, well, this guy's posing like he's just Joe Citizen, very, and okay, so he's in the machine. It makes some sense.
Would you out me if I were anonymous?
You've never written anything that it would depend tactically. Sure, you would be at risk. You would all be at risk.
I have to jump in on an outing discussion because
that's a different kind of outing. But go ahead.
I was just going to draw a line between those 2 points.
Segue.
Yeah, segue.
A really interesting political turn of events in the last couple of years has been outing elected officials and their campaign staff who are gay and are benefiting from being part of the gay community. And we kind of have a, for those of you who aren't part of the gay community, there's just kind of a code of ethics. You don't out people. They come to clubs and events and bars and you know them, you don't, it's just what, you just don't do it for safety and confidentiality. And so a lot of these high profile folks are benefiting from that cloak of anonymity and enjoying lives of privilege, but then voting and working and using their power to vote against our rights. So Mike Rogers down in DC started a blog called blogactive.com, and he has outed a lot of folks. And he actually there's now a movie out about him called Outrage, and he's hot on the trail of Charlie Crist and all sorts of people. But it's not quite outing. I mean, outing is disclosing somebody who is gay and is choosing to be confidential about that, and I think that's wrong. But exposing people's hypocrisy, I'm all about that. And I think if you're going to benefit from the privileges of being gay and then vote against my having some benefits, then that's fine with me. But there are plenty of elected officials who vote well and do good things and aren't really in danger of having their hypocrisy exposed because they're not being hypocrites. They're just living quiet lives. And so that comes to me a lot. People send me tips on who's gay and explore this, and I don't have time to do it, I don't want to do it. Although I will tell you on a constant basis, people ask me to find some dirt on Rick Santorum and Jane Horry. It's just a constant.
I only did that once.
And
Are they having an affair?
I don't know.
No, I was going to ask, because it did turn up in the last senatorial election with Santorum and Casey, that Rick Santorum's
Robert Trainum, his
public relations person, was he in the closet? Was he outed?
Yeah.
And I can understand the hypocrisy of the elected official if they're in the closet and yet they're voting to send money to Uganda for whatever law that was going to be in place. But does that extend to their staffs? I mean, I forget his last name,
Robert Trainum.
Was Mr. Trainum, is he open season to be outed merely because he is the spokesperson to a man who is so obviously of a traditional morality?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He's lending his time and talent to hurt our community. He gets no protections because he's taking a high-profile job, being compensated very well, and he was moving in higher and gay circles in D.C., so he was not in the closet, and Rick Santorum knew he was gay. So Rick Santorum would have him come over to his house and be around his kids, but then say that myself, Laura, other people here who are gay cannot be around his children because we might infect them with the gay germ. So I just think, and I have to, in interest of full disclosure, I was an intern for Rick Santorum in 2001. I have the picture on my website of me and Rick holding hands. So yes, if you want to out me, it's okay.
But you didn't marry his daughter.
If I may, when it comes to outing people or public figures like we're talking about now, this is why I'm grateful to have a Pittsburgh Lesbian Correspondents in town, because I would rather have someone in charge of those issues who can speak from that perspective. I would never, under any circumstances, out a public figure in that sense. And the reason I bring that up is because I think that a lot of the time, obviously, political blogs, bloggers, commenters, they get a bad rap for being, irresponsible, or they'll say anything, or they'll gossip, and it's a cesspool in there, and they'll say any old thing. And when you look at the things that we all know, and many of you all other who are political bloggers, but we all know, and we aren't saying. I mean, it's remarkable. I've only been blogging for, I guess, close to 4 years. It's remarkable that certain individuals were outed, or certain other open secrets weren't mentioned. It's just, I think we all deserve to pat ourselves on the back and be like, wow, we've kept all of this public official's junk under wraps, that public official
That's
junk
what John
under wraps.
McIntyre's for, isn't it?
Well, I wanted to ask about that because it seems to me that maybe there is an obligation to do more outing in the public arena.
Okay.
But let me put it in terms of a question or ask you for comments about the symbiotic relationship between political bloggers and some of us mainstream media political reporters. Because there is a symbiotic relationship, and you mentioned John McIntyre, Maria. And John McIntyre, I remember the day he did this, when he went online and posted on his blog that Luke Ravenstahl had been arrested at Heinz Field. Now, we all knew that. Everybody knew that in the political, certainly we did in the media. And the discussion immediately in the newsroom was the fact that John McIntyre has now said what we all know to be true. How can we introduce that to KDK television, WTAE television, Kitty radio, whatever? The discussion went on and on and on. It ended very quickly because Luke Ravenstahl called a press conference to respond to McIntyre's blog. That immediately made it public news because we cover the mayor.
He's really good for doing stuff like that.
It was, if Luke had kept his mouth shut, there would have been a real issue as to whether or not we could have gone forward with a story because it was on.
Isn't there that I seem to see it where now you see reporters saying, well, rumors are out there that, it's being reported at this blog, it's being said online, it's being Twittered, it's being tweeted, it's being Facebook.
And you picked it right up. My suggestion is, or my comment is, that I think the standards by which the relationship between the blogosphere and mainstream media has changed since that first instance.
Yeah.
And David, you and I have had conversations about this over the years, about the relevance of the blogosphere to the media world. It has really changed. And I think now there's much less of the conversation. And in fact, you mentioned the Casablanca issue and the Twitter issue. I ended up talking to Signor Ferrari. I had to modify his voice in order to use it by request. And then BF Barbie, another tweeter, a tweet on Twitter. Is that right? Twit. I ended up interviewing her, but again, she was okay about gender, but she didn't want her face. So, but again, all of that comes out of the blogosphere now.
Yeah. Well, it points to basically what Maria said, that there's two sides of the coin, because we've seen, I know that being on the left side of the political aisle, seen so often, say in Fox News, where the start of the discussion will be what Maria said. Word is out that.
I know, they'll say some say.
Some say. It's being reported on the Drudge Report that. Or the World News, WorldNet Daily says that Barack Obama was actually born in Kenya. Well, it's a way to introduce something that might not be true into the public discourse. And so, on the one hand, you got the McIntyre thing, where I think the story kind of rested on the definition of arrest is, because for the mayor there were no formal charges. He was handcuffed to a chair in a room, so he was stopped from doing whatever he was doing. So in a sense, it's by the verb arrested, but the police officer didn't arrest him, so he was able to
That
say,
was his argument.
I think that was his argument. And just to be fair and balanced, and we are nothing if not fair and balanced in the blogosphere in Pittsburgh. No, and so there is a flip side to it, because on the one hand you can get, well, the mayor was handcuffed to a chair, at least as far as I know. And then the SUV with the barbecue sauce from the Department of Homeland Security, that did happen, and it did bubble up from the blogosphere into the mainstream media. But then again, by exactly the same mechanism, you have, this was not the birth certificate. The birth certificate is fake because it says so, or people are asking the question on, freerepublic.com or the Drudge Report or whatever. So it's a very difficult kind of topography to move through. For those of you who don't know, that's John Delano. maybe on the 1% chance that you don't hear is
John Dowling.
John Dowling.
Stop it.
Sorry. I apologize. Sue was going to say.
Well, I said experience the opposite direction of that. It was Christmas Eve. Laura, what's his name? Lavik. Is that right? The police officer who wasn't convicted of domestic violence yet was arrested, and I saw a clip on KDKA that said who was it? That said he had been charged, or he had been let go from the police department. He had been fired. And I went with it, and then in my overzealousness, and spent Christmas Day on the phone with the KDKA newsroom trying to see if they were going to post it, and they weren't, because it wasn't 30 seconds. So I was left hanging, but it was my own choice, because I didn't wait for the clip to go up, and then I couldn't back up what I had said. And so that was kind of a real interesting situation where I was depending on them, and then it turned out that wasn't quite true, that they had received a letter, and I should also say in disclosure, my partner works for OMI, so she was interpreting all this for me, but I was trying to figure out what was going on. Like, was he really fired, or he was going to have a meeting to discuss the possibility that it could be fired if charges were pressed. And it was really interesting, but I learned a really hard lesson that KDKA does not post short stories, so I'm not going to have any use for them. And then also wait for the link to go up so you don't miss Christmas dinner.
Actually, they will post. If you had called me, I've asked our web team to post 30-second sound bites from
I'm
politicians.
going to do that next time.
What we would call voice over to sound, VOSOT. You're right, that traditionally, I don't know what TAE does, but traditionally those don't show up on the website. But you can request, and our web team is usually pretty good. If it's aired, then you can get it up.
Probably on Christmas Day they didn't want it.
The bastard attorney in the room wants to. Sorry.
What I want to say has nothing to do with being a lawyer. This goes back to when I was a journalist, although it's been almost 30 years since I was paid as a journalist in this town. But one of the reasons I quit the newspapers for which I worked was that I was astounded that the newspaper wouldn't publish information because they didn't want to offend the subject. It was well known when I was at the Press and Post Gazette that a very prominent elected official in this town was a kleptomaniac. And every once in a while, some new cut reporter would come in and say, "Hey, guess what I just found out? This guy's a kleptomaniac. He goes into Kaufman's and Horns and Gimbels and just walks out with all sorts of stuff, and nobody touches him because he's..." And after a while, I went to one of the city editors, and, it became plain that there were certain people in town, like that official, Big Caliguri, the Roomies, who were not to be touched. They could rape a 5-year-old in the middle of Green Street, and there would not be a peep. That's one of the reasons. So I'm astounded to hear that you guys know things.
That's what I was just going to ask.
Publish them. If you're waiting for the real media to publish them,
Let me
qualify. Add another one
Yeah,
before you have to. I'm completely on the outside. I don't work in journalism. I don't blog. I read political blogs like crazy, Daily Coast, etc. And to just come in here and see mainstream Pittsburgh media and bloggers here, and then hear a blogger say that he's got information from inside the village, quote unquote. Politicians and media call them the villagers. A lot of people would call it the village. Is kind of astounding to me, in the same way.
Well, let me qualify. Let me qualify. What I
She's
said
just talking specifically about gay outings.
It's not exactly specifically about that. I personally, maybe I shouldn't. I try to make a judgment call. Does this have to do with their job as a public official? Does this in kleptomania? Does this in some way reflect upon what they're going to do as lawmakers? If it's a matter of, well, I don't want to embarrass this person, but they could go ahead and be a mayor, be a councilman, be the director of public works with this personal problem, I don't view that as my role. I try to, if anything has to do with something that could, in if you're voting for the person, then I guess that it does kick it up a notch, but still, I try to keep it to substantive stuff.
Well, it's
And hearing you say that, you're right. Maybe I should. Maybe I'm being a Boy Scout. I don't know.
No, I don't think so. But I mean, it sounds like the worry is among consumers of political blog is that political blog could be co-opted by mainstream media. Co-opt is a loaded term in a lot of ways, but that's why there's always going to be new blogs coming up on the outside as others get absorbed in.
I don't think they're being co-opted by the mainstream media. They're being co-opted by the officials.
Well, the officials
elected
or
officials.
whatever, correct, the power structure.
The power, right, exactly.
That is a danger.
Some of it has to do with just the reality of blogging. Because I mean, I had an elected official call me with a great story, but was basically like, "Here's what you got to do your research," and I just don't have the time because I have a job and I have other stuff going on, and it was going to be a tremendous amount of work to pull that story up. And so it wasn't so much that it wasn't a good story or shouldn't be told, but I, don't have the resources to make it happen. But he's not going to trust someone in mainstream media. So. But
on the other hand, I'm actually kind of surprised to hear you say what you just said, because I was upstairs listening to you talk about the libel and slander.
That was a lawyer talk.
Well, that's true, but we are still on planet Earth. So, I mean, if someone were to feed me a story about a kleptomaniac, whatever, city official, my first question is, well, is it true? And if it's true, how do I verify? If I can't verify it, then it could be coming from the Oracle of Delphi himself or herself. And I can't go with it because what if I'm wrong? And if you do enough of that, I think when during the Lewinsky thing, Drudge was priding himself on being 80% right all the time, or at least 80% right. Well, if you make enough mistakes where someone says, "Well, you're just full of crap," then 3 weeks down the line, why would anyone want to come to my blog if they can't trust what I say is at least close to the truth? Mr. Heath, has a question.
Yeah, just talking about the Ravenstall thing, I remember when the story broke, when McIntyre published his committee's post, some information came out about that, and there was a clip run where a reporter had asked Ravenstall, "Were you arrested on Halloween?" And he said no. And the reporter left it at that, I guess, because he couldn't, like you say, necessarily prove that he had been. And I guess, he disputes even that he was handcuffed to the chair, but the point being that, like you said, the story was around. I guess people knew it, and in fact, reporters had pursued it unsuccessfully.
But if you remember that clip, at the end of it, he said something like, "Were you in handcuffs?" The word handcuffs was used, and Luke just changed the subject.
Okay.
So, still...
The mood was a little screwy because it was done in the middle of the street.
Yeah, it was
Luke had the excuse of saying, "Oh, I'm on my way in, I gotta leave now," but then he did lie, so...
Yeah.
So, but the story had this, when you say the story was out there, in fact, it was out there, and I don't know if that clip had aired on air before, McIntyre did his thing, but reporters were pursuing it, and it took McIntyre pushing the issue and taking the risk for it to really get out there.
But John's one of those interesting people too that bridges mainstream media and blogging. He's made that transition into social media, but he certainly had credentials as well before he came to Pittsburgh. But so I think it's interesting that he's kind of the person that did play that pivotal role because he was uniquely positioned to do that. Because he certainly knew what he was doing as a journalist. He understood how far he could go and what the boundaries were. And he's gone all sorts of places now on social media that maybe he did when he was a reporter in all those little towns he makes fun of and his stand-up. So,
Ms. England.
Well, I have a question about something you haven't really talked about, and you talked a little bit about outing reporters. What about anonymous bloggers, but what about your commenters? How do you feel about that? I make it a point of never commenting anonymously on the internet because I know that it's not really anonymous. How do you feel? What sort of policy do you use about exposing or not exposing anonymous?
This is something we've talked about in another session around here when I was with you. Normally, first of all, we have a very liberal commenting policy, meaning that, like in 6 years, maybe 10 comments we've deleted, and they have to be something that's, just someone just swearing at another comment, or not at me, or David, but at another comment, or, maybe threatening violence vaguely, or something horribly, racist. Just something that's so over the top that it, no, we're just taking it off. But as far as outed commenters, I know someone outed one of our trolls at one point, and I think it pretty much went too far. And at another point, I've outed a couple, but that's when it's been a corporate troll. Like I'm writing about Marcellus Shale, someone comes to the blog and they put a comment like, "Oh, but you should see, really the oil industry has a point here." And it's like you Google the guy's name, and I thought it was so stupid. I guess he got hired as a social media expert because he has 5,000 Facebook fans or whatever, friends or whatever. But you can see he worked for Chesapeake Oil, and he led the link he led was an industry site. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to put that out there because I think my other,
I remember that.
Yeah,
and I'm not arguing with the call because I think that's useful. I think that's useful information to bring up. I do remember actually being a little bit peeved that you exposed the person, said, ha ha ha, we can't believe anything that you say because you come from oil, but you didn't answer the person's point. Like whatever the person had to say. Given they were a show for the oil industry,
they almost said nothing. They were just like, well, here's another view. But the view was an industry site that you wouldn't, unless you poked around a tiny bit on the site, you wouldn't realize was a site paid for by a consortium of oil companies and drilling companies, and that they actually were paid to be a social media person by a drilling company. So I think in that case, fair game. Especially since they're going under their own name. Geez.
I personally enjoy it whenever the corporate opposition comes on my site. Or it's a huge compliment, and I'm like, okay, try to do your thing, because 9 times out of 10, they're going to make themselves end up looking worse.
But he didn't identify himself in the comment that he was he was paid by the oil industry. That was not his comment. I thought it should be.
For the sake of full disclosure, I have been haven't seen anything in the past couple of weeks, but for some reason, the Blogspot, which is where our blog is, has some kind of security flaw where I've seen. I don't know if you've seen these, the little 1 or 2 line comments that are actually links back to Asian porn. And whenever I see those, I don't have any problems.
What's that address?
When I said we only deleted 10, I do not count commercial. Real commercial.
I don't have anything against Asian porn per se, but not really on the blog. That's not a place for the blog. And if the Asian porn site wants to come at me for copyright issues, as you said earlier, because I did delete the comment where it says, "Hey, great idea," and then everything else is in Asian script, and you link to it, and it's things I can't say.
Yeah, but the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee came after me because Democracy for Pittsburgh, who went after Rick Santorum's homestead tax issue, and they went through a bunch of posts, 5 posts back, and found where someone spammed our blog or maybe it was our meetup site or something, and they found some Asian porn link and then said that we were purveyors of porn. and I found myself on the phone with some reporter from the Trip going back and forth. They would talk to the senatorial campaign, and then they would talk to me, and they would talk back. Well, they said this about you. Well, here we're forwarding the email they sent us about your group. It was just, I couldn't believe it was a surreal situation.
That's all question to Ben.
Yeah, I want to make one comment about the established media. And say, just like the idea of the Post-Gazette right now doing that article about you scratching my back and government, I'm scratching your back. Like bloggers don't have that kind of, like you were saying, the time or the resources. Like I know like Business Week did something on the the ETS for commodity, and basically explain to people like this is the big thing that everybody's jumping on, but there's no way in the world that people who are like throwing this money into this new kind of derivative is making money, because they were showing that every time, But it was a group of reporters who was digging up this stuff, and I just think like that was like way beyond a knowledge of a blog or most people to understand that, or enough people to get into figuring out like, this company in South Fayette is or not South Fayette, but like say Fayette County is hooked up with this person here and hooked up with that person there. Is like there's some issues that are just so like way too complicated, like that you need like a team of reporters. And like I know there's like smoking gun, and there's a few people like that, but like I think they're few and far between on the internet. And like like the bloggers who are pointing that this guy's gay or this guy got arrested or something like that is like different from like these huge stories that like break through.
I'll tell you what. I'm glad you mentioned that series because it's the Post-Gazette series. It was a good one, and we're all thinking about it. First of all, a few times people have already said, well, bloggers don't have the time or the resources to do that kind of reporting. Honestly, I want to qualify that. What we don't have often is the energy, I think. I mean, we've all done that kind of reporting on occasion, and we do have the time because 11 p.m. through 4 a.m., when you're thinking about it, is a perfectly wonderful time to do that research. And if you're up late at night on your pillow going, I hate those people, you might as well be blogging about it. So that's one thing. Number two, as far as what the role is whenever an expose like that comes out, what the Post-Gazette can do is report the connected dots, like they literally did, and report this is what's happening, this is what's happening, this is what's happening. Okay, it's a very complicated story, but that's great. What they can't do is say, and this is troublesome, why? All they can do is say that this is happening, and then come out with an epilogue the next day talking about, well, we asked a few people, and it turns out that this happens everywhere, blah, blah. There's a necessary next step for us to do.
There may be a very kind of watery editorial.
Very watery.
Sunday saying this is troublesome.
Yeah. It is you almost need to spend hours and hours of research looking into, just reading that article, understanding it, and then saying, here are all of the reasons why this is important, and here are all of the reasons why maybe this isn't inevitable. Maybe we can be... Maybe if they do it everywhere else, maybe we can be the world's first city anywhere in the world that actually cleaned up their government a little bit. Wouldn't that be nice? It's up to us to point out these things are possible. Sorry, I got on my soapbox. I really wanted
Does Rich Lord expect you to do that when he writes an article like that?
I would know.
He's not here.
This is the boss hat.
This is one of the. I'm David Tessitore, and you mentioned Rich Lord. I remember when Rich was with the city paper, and I met his editor, and the editor said, "Thank you. You're responsible for half the news in our paper." That was back when we had a citizen advisory panel at the regional planning level and uncovered billions of dollars worth of fraud, which are still affecting the region, and we can't get the major media to cover it. Rich was covering it then. But it's the implications of a lot of things that are there that don't get out there in the paper. Or, for example, things that have happened in the past that, even though it hasn't been reported, they say, well, it's old, it's not news. Like the privatization of our library. We had a public library for over 100 years that Carnegie donated, and it was privatized in 1994. But you don't hear KDK talking about that. You don't hear about how that happened. And what the implications of this and why they're going into capital debt, which is the reason there's a deficit, they want to get rid of these things. This is not being explored at all because we also have untouchable, not people, but untouchable entities like transit or the library or something that doesn't get touched or exposed.
We might have to end it there because it's 3:50. Yeah, and we have a basket.